In the pre-dawn hush of June 6, 1944, a vast armada of ships and men gathered off the coast of Normandy, poised to make history. Yet the story of D-Day did not begin in those tense hours, nor even in the months leading up to the invasion. Its roots stretched back through years of conflict and debate, shaped by necessity, diplomacy, and an urgent drive to bring the Second World War to a close. When the last Allied soldier slipped away from the beaches of Dunkirk in 1940, a sobering realization dawned on the leaders of the United States and Great Britain. Europe had fallen under the shadow of Nazi control, and the path to liberation would require more than resilience. It would demand a return. From that moment, the question of when and how to land powerful Allied forces on the continent became both a strategic imperative and a persistent challenge. President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Prime Minister Winston Churchill, meeting in Washington at the Arcadia Conference in December 1941 to January 1942, settled on what became known as the Germany First policy. With the world at war on multiple fronts, they agreed that defeating Hitler in Europe would take precedence. Yet, even as consensus formed on the need for a Western front, the specifics, where, when, and with what force remained deeply contentious. Early plans for a cross-channel assault took shape as Operation Sledgehammer in 1942 and Operation Roundup in 1943. These bold proposals ultimately ran aground on the shoals of reality. The Allies simply did not have the resources or logistical framework to support such an immense undertaking at that time. Their energies were diverted to other critical campaigns. Operation Torch in North Africa and the invasion of Sicily drew men, material, and focus, delaying the dream of returning to the French coast. Still, the idea of a Western invasion was never far from the minds of Allied strategists. The longer the delay, however, the steeper the price paid elsewhere. No one felt that cost more keenly than Joseph Stalin. From the east, the Soviet leader watched his Red Army bear the brunt of German aggression, fighting brutal battles and sustaining enormous losses. Stalin's persistent calls to Roosevelt and Churchill for the opening of a second front became a steady drumbeat in Allied relations. He argued, with increasing urgency, that only a direct assault on Western Europe could relieve the pressure on Soviet forces and hasten the defeat of Nazi Germany. This Soviet pressure added a layer of political urgency to the military planning, making the question of a cross-channel invasion not just a matter of strategy, but of alliance and trust. Through a series of high-level conferences, Allied leaders worked to transform intention into action, drawing closer to the commitment that would culminate in D-Day. The Trident Conference in Washington in May 1943, followed by Quadrant in Quebec that August, kept the momentum alive. But it was at the Tehran Conference, also known as Eureka, in late 1943 that decisions crystallized. In Tehran, Stalin pressed for specifics, not merely promises, but concrete plans, dates, and the appointment of a single Supreme Allied commander to oversee the operation. The Allies responded by appointing General Dwight D. Eisenhower to the role. With this, Operation Overlord, the code name for the cross-channel invasion, moved from theory to impending reality. Yet, as plans advanced, so too did the sense of peril. The Allies faced not only formidable German defenses, but also the challenge of secrecy and surprise. The Germans, for their part, had not been idle. Adolf Hitler, ever mindful of the threat posed by an Allied landing, ordered the construction of the Atlantic Wall, a massive 2,400-mile defensive line bristling with bunkers, gun emplacements, and obstacles. He placed Field Marshal Erwin Rommel in charge of this coastal defense, tasking him with the impossible, to make the beaches of Western Europe impregnable. Still, for all their preparations, the Germans remained uncertain. Where would the blow fall? When would it come? Into this uncertainty, the Allies wove an intricate web of deception. Beginning in July 1943, they embarked on Operation Bodyguard, a masterful strategy designed to mislead German intelligence and obscure the true location and timing of the invasion. Central to this effort was Operation Fortitude South, which aimed to convince the German High Command that the main Allied assault would land at Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France, rather than the beaches of Normandy. The Allies orchestrated a dizzying array of diversions. Fake armies assembled in southeastern England, complete with inflatable tanks and wooden aircraft. Radio traffic mimicked the movements of non-existent divisions, and a network of double agents fed carefully crafted misinformation to the enemy. The London Controlling Section coordinated these efforts, while ultra-intelligence, gleaned from the codebreakers at Bletchley Park, provided vital insights into German thinking. Perhaps most remarkably, the Allies managed an entire stable of double agents, including Juan Pujol Garcia, known to the Germans as Garbo. Through Garbo and others, the double-cross system manipulated German expectations, reinforcing the illusion that Normandy was a feint and that the real blow would land elsewhere. While the Allies spun their web, they also grappled with the sheer scale of the challenge before them. The invasion would require the coordination of air, land, and sea forces on an unprecedented level. The need for secrecy was absolute. Any hint of the true target could allow the Germans to reinforce Normandy and doom the operation. Weather, too, became a silent adversary. The English Channel, often turbulent and unpredictable, could easily disrupt the intricate choreography of landings, paratroop drops, and bombardments that Overlord demanded. Every plan was made contingent upon the right conditions, the right moment. As the spring of 1944 unfolded, final preparations gathered pace. Troops trained relentlessly, rehearsing landings on carefully constructed mock-ups of the Normandy beaches. Supplies piled high in southern England, mountains of ammunition, rations, vehicles, and equipment, all waiting for the signal to move. Across the Channel, Rommel inspected his defenses, ordering more mines, more obstacles, more vigilance. Yet for all his efforts, the German commander could not be everywhere at once, nor could he pierce the fog of Allied deception. The road to D-Day was thus a journey shaped by necessity and ingenuity, by the demands of alliance and the art of misdirection. The Allies' determination to open a Western front, hammered out in endless meetings and conferences, was matched only by the complexity of the challenge they faced. Every resource, every ruse, every ounce of resolve was bent toward the goal of breaching Hitler's fortress Europe. As the assembled armada waited for the order to advance, the fate of the war and the hopes of millions balanced on the edge of uncertainty. The prelude to invasion was a story of patience and preparation, of shadow and substance, of a coalition determined to seize the initiative and, at last, turn the tide. As the spring of 1944 unfolded, southern England became a vast military camp. Fields once green with wheat and hedgerows now buzzed with the activity of armies gathering for the most ambitious amphibious assault in history. The planning and preparation for Operation Overlord demanded a level of precision and scale unmatched by any previous military endeavor. Every decision, from the selection of the landing site to the coordination of land, air, and sea forces, required careful calculation, collaboration, and a willingness to risk everything on a single, decisive blow. The choice of Normandy as the landing site defied expectations. Many believed the Allies would strike at Calais, the shortest route across the Channel and the most direct path to Germany. Yet this very obviousness worked against Calais. Normandy, with its broad beaches, offered terrain better suited for landing large forces. The fortifications there, though formidable, were lighter than those at Calais. The location also brought the beaches within effective range of Allied air cover, an advantage essential for protecting the invasion from counterattacks and for striking at German reinforcements. Additionally, Normandy's proximity to key objectives, including the port of Cherbourg and the road networks leading inland, made it an attractive, if riskier, choice. These factors, weighed carefully by Allied planners, tipped the scales in Normandy's favor. The scale of the buildup was staggering. By May 1944, over 2.8 million Allied troops, more than 1.5 million Americans among them, were concentrated in southern England in preparation for the invasion. This figure represents the total Allied forces assembled in England, not the number who would land on D-Day itself. The logistical demands of sustaining such a force bordered on the unimaginable. Ships ferrying millions of tons of supplies across the Atlantic, mountains of ammunition, crates of rations, thousands of vehicles, and all the specialized equipment needed for the assault. The British countryside filled with depots, vehicle parks, and airfields, each carefully mapped out to support the coming storm. New transport networks were constructed, and artificial harbors, ingenious structures known as mulberries, were designed to be towed across the Channel and assembled off the beaches, ensuring that the flow of men and materiel would not falter once the landings began. Overseeing this vast enterprise was a unified command structure forged in the crucible of coalition warfare. In December 1943, General Dwight D. Eisenhower was appointed Supreme Allied Commander, the man who would bear ultimate responsibility for the operation's success or failure. Eisenhower's leadership was complemented by General Bernard Montgomery, who commanded the ground forces that would spearhead the attack. Together, they presided over the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, or SHAEF, an international staff that brought together the best minds from Britain, the United States, Canada, and other Allied nations. The creation of SHAEF ensured that decisions could be made swiftly and that every aspect of the operation from logistics to intelligence would be coordinated under a single authoritative vision. Training for the invasion was relentless and often unforgiving. Troops drilled in the English countryside, where mock-ups of enemy positions and replica beach defenses gave them a foretaste of what awaited across the channel. Live-fire exercises tested not just marksmanship, but the nerves and coordination of men who would soon face battle together. One rehearsal, Exercise Tiger, became infamous for the tragedies that sometimes accompanied such preparations. Yet the lessons learned, hard as they were, saved lives when the real assault began. Intelligence gathering was equally rigorous. Allied aircraft scoured the French coast for clues, snapping thousands of aerial photographs to map German defenses. In a testament to both ingenuity and courage, operatives ventured onto the beaches at night to collect sand samples, ensuring that the ground would support tanks and heavy vehicles. The French resistance played a vital role, risking their lives to sabotage German communications and railways and relaying information about troop movements and fortifications to Allied planners. Secrecy and deception were as crucial to the preparation as the stockpiling of ammunition or the construction of mulberries. Operation Fortitude, the most elaborate deception effort of the war, conjured an entire Phantom Army, the first United States Army group, supposedly led by the charismatic General George Patton. Dummy tanks and aircraft, carefully positioned in the southeast of England, fooled German reconnaissance. Fake radio traffic crackled through the airwaves, creating the illusion of vast armies waiting to leap across the Channel at Calais. Double agents, some trusted by the Germans for years, fed carefully crafted lies to their handlers. Every ruse, every misdirection, aimed to convince the Germans to hold their main forces away from Normandy until it was too late. The planners faced challenges at every turn. Coordinating the actions of vast land, sea, and air forces was a task of unprecedented complexity. The logistics of moving millions of men and mountains of equipment required not only meticulous planning, but also improvisation in the face of the unexpected. National differences of language, doctrine, and even diet had to be bridged to forge a single, unified striking force. Amphibious warfare presented problems as old as the ancient Greeks, and some that were entirely new. Planners devised specialized landing craft, floating tanks, and ingenious engineering solutions to overcome the German obstacles bristling along the shoreline. Yet for all their preparations, some variables remained stubbornly beyond their control. Chief among these was the weather. In the days leading up to the invasion, storms lashed the channel, churning waves and blanketing the coast in fog. The invasion, originally set for June 5th, was postponed by 24 nerve-wracking hours, a delay that risked exposing the entire operation but was judged essential to its success. In the final days, the complexity of the invasion plan became clear. The initial assault, codenamed Operation Neptune, focused on the naval landings and the opening phase of the attack. Operation Overlord encompassed the broader campaign to secure and expand the beachhead, driving inland toward liberation. 5 beaches were chosen for the landings: Utah and Omaha on the western flank, assigned to American forces, Gold in the center for the British, Juno slightly to the east for the Canadians, and Sword at the easternmost point, where British troops would land closest to Caen. Airborne operations would precede the seaborne assault, with paratroopers and glider-borne infantry tasked to secure the flanks, seize key bridges, and sow confusion among the defenders. The coordination required for this assault across sea, air, and land, involving multiple nations and services, was extraordinary. As the last days of preparation slipped away, the mood among the assembled forces was a mixture of tension, resolve, and anticipation. For many, the scale of what was about to unfold was only just becoming real. The coming battle would test not just the strength of armies, but the fate that meticulous planning, technological ingenuity, and human courage could together shape the fate of nations. The Allies had done all they could to prepare, to deceive, to coordinate, and to train. Now, all that remained was to launch themselves into the unknown, trusting that their preparation, meticulous, massive, and unyielding, would carry them through the storm to the far shore. Before dawn touched the horizon on June 6, 1944, the first act of the Allied invasion was already underway. More than 23,000 airborne troops, Americans, British, and Canadians, descended silently from the night sky, scattered by wind and confusion across the dark fields and hedgerows of Normandy. Their mission was urgent and perilous: to secure bridges, seize crossroads, and sow chaos behind German lines before the main force arrived. Many parachuted far from their intended drop zones, landing in flooded meadows or tangled orchards, cut off from their units and forced to improvise. Despite the disorder, small groups of paratroopers pressed ahead, disrupting German communications and holding key positions. The confusion sown by these early arrivals rippled throughout the day, shaping the German response and giving the main invasion force a fighting chance. As first light broke over the sea, the channel filled with an armada unlike anything the world had seen. Nearly 7,000 ships and landing craft surged toward the coast, carrying 156,000 Allied troops. Overhead, more than 12,000 aircraft filled the sky, providing a constant drumbeat of support and protection. The sheer scale and coordination of the operation was staggering, a testament not only to Allied planning but also to the urgency and desperation of the hour. For the young men packed tightly aboard landing craft, the wait was agonizing. Many had spent a restless night, nerves stretched taut, listening to the thunder of naval guns as the preliminary bombardment began. At precisely 6:30 a.m., the ramp doors crashed open and the main amphibious assault began. 5 beaches along the Normandy coast became the stage for the largest seaborne attack in history. Each had its own codename and its own challenges. Utah and Omaha for the Americans, Gold and Sword for the British, and Juno for the Canadians. The Germans, entrenched behind the Atlantic Wall, waited with machine guns, artillery, and an array of deadly obstacles. Of all the landing sites, Omaha Beach became a crucible of fire. The American forces landing there encountered ferocious resistance. The geography of Omaha, its high bluffs, narrow exits, and concentrated defenses favored the defenders. As the first waves of soldiers struggled ashore, they faced a storm of bullets and shells. Many never made it past the waterline, cut down before their boots touched dry sand. The beach was littered with the wrecks of landing craft and the bodies of the fallen. Despite meticulous planning, the initial attack faltered, pinned down by German fire. In the chaos, leadership and courage emerged from the ranks. Small groups of soldiers crawled forward, using craters and beach obstacles as cover, inching up the slopes. Their perseverance was costly. Of the 34,000 men who landed at Omaha that day, approximately 2,400 became casualties. But their determination proved decisive. Inch by inch, they cleared paths through minefields and barbed wire, reaching the base of the bluffs and, eventually, pushing inland. At Utah Beach, just a few miles to the west, the story unfolded differently. Strong currents and navigational errors caused many landing craft to touch down almost 2,000 yards south of their intended landing zone. Yet this twist of fate proved beneficial. The area was less heavily defended, and American units quickly overwhelmed the German positions. Casualties were comparatively light, and by midday, troops at Utah had pushed several miles inland, linking up with some of the scattered airborne units and beginning the task of expanding the beachhead. To the east, British and Canadian forces landed at Sword, Gold, and Juno beaches, each facing unique obstacles. At Sword, British troops encountered stiff German resistance in the form of machine gun nests and well-placed artillery, but managed to advance toward their objective of Caen, though the city itself would remain out of reach for weeks. Gold Beach saw brutal fighting, especially around the village of Le Hamel, where German strongpoints slowed the advance. Yet by late afternoon, the British had broken through, aided by specialized tanks and determined infantry. The Canadians at Juno Beach faced a heavily fortified shoreline. The first wave suffered significant losses, but perseverance and momentum carried them through the German defenses. By evening, the Canadians had penetrated farther inland than any other Allied force, though at a high cost. The German defenses, for all their fearsome appearance, were far from impenetrable. The Atlantic Wall was studded with bunkers, mines, and obstacles designed to tear apart landing craft and slow any advance. Yet, as the day revealed, the line had critical gaps and weaknesses. Some fortifications were incomplete, others lightly manned, and the carefully laid minefields did not always cover the approaches the Allies used. The German response itself was hampered by confusion. The scattered paratrooper landings and the success of Allied deception efforts left commanders uncertain of the true scope and location of the invasion. Key decisions were delayed, and precious hours were lost. Field Marshal Rommel, the architect of Normandy's defenses, was away from the front, and Hitler's rigid command structure further slowed the German reaction. For the men on the beaches, the day unfolded in a blur of chaos and terror. Veterans would later recall the blinding noise, the roar of guns, the shriek of shells, the cries of the wounded. Sand and seawater churned together, stained by smoke and blood. Many of the soldiers were young and untested, thrust into a crucible that demanded instant adaptation and raw courage. Some officers and non-commissioned men rallied their battered units, while others acted on their own initiative, leading small groups up the bluffs or knocking out machine gun nests with grenades and bayonets. The confusion of battle was total, but so too was the resolve. The mission was clear, and the cost of failure unthinkable. As the hours passed, the weather played its own unpredictable part. Swells and shifting winds scattered landing craft and complicated the movement of men and supplies. Airborne units, meant to secure the flanks and block German reinforcements, were scattered far and wide, forced to improvise and regroup on the fly. Yet despite this turmoil, the Allies pressed forward. Engineers cleared obstacles under fire, medics tended to the wounded in makeshift aid stations, and supplies trickled ashore as the tides allowed. By late afternoon, the 5 beachheads had been linked, sometimes tenuously, and the first armored vehicles were pushing inland. Pivotal moments abounded throughout the day. At Omaha, the difference between defeat and fragile success hung on the actions of small bands of men willing to risk everything to breach the German line. At Sword and Juno, the speed of the advance and the ability to exploit weak spots in the defense proved crucial. The absence of Rommel and the confusion in the German command structure gave the Allies just enough of an edge to hold their gains. By nightfall, the cost was painfully clear. The Allies had suffered more than 10,000 casualties, dead, wounded, or missing. Yet they had achieved what many had feared impossible, a firm foothold in Normandy. The longest day had not broken them. Instead, it marked the beginning of the end for Nazi control in Western Europe, and the opening act of liberation that would echo across the continent in the weeks and months to come. In the hours after June 6, 1944, as the smoke cleared and the wounded were carried from the battered coast of Normandy, a new phase of the war began. The Allies had accomplished what many thought impossible. In a single day, 156,000 soldiers crossed the Channel and gained a foothold on Fortress Europe, facing roughly 78,000 German defenders. This was more than a victory of arms or courage. It was the opening chapter in the liberation of Western Europe, a moment when the tide of war, so long dominated by Nazi power, truly began to turn. But the beachheads were only the beginning. In the immediate aftermath, the fighting did not ease. Instead, the Normandy campaign became a grinding, bloody struggle through the dense, hedgerow-studded Bocage countryside. Progress inland was slow and hard-won. German resistance stiffened, and every hedge, every sunken lane became a potential ambush site, a trap for tanks and infantry alike. The Allies, buoyed by their success on the beaches, now faced a different kind of war, one that tested not just their planning and training, but their endurance and adaptability. The battle for the key port of Cherbourg soon took center stage. Control of a deep-water port was vital for the Allied supply effort, and the Germans were determined to deny it. Meanwhile, to the east, the historic city of Caen became a focal point. Its capture was crucial for the British and Canadian forces, but the Germans clung to it with dogged persistence, turning its ruins into a fortress. Weeks of fierce combat followed, with neither side willing to give ground. The advance was measured in yards, not miles, and the cost was high. It was not until late July, with the launch of Operation Cobra, that the Allies finally achieved the breakout they so desperately needed. American forces punched through the German lines west of St. Lo, exploiting weaknesses and unleashing a rapid advance that soon enveloped large numbers of German troops. The German front in Normandy began to collapse. The Allies poured through the gap, racing across the French countryside, liberating towns and villages that had endured years under occupation. The slow, agonizing slog through Normandy gave way to a tidal surge that would sweep across northern France. The strategic consequences of D-Day in the Normandy campaign were immense. The landings in France forced Germany to fight a two-front war in earnest. Hitler's armies, already stretched by the relentless Soviet advance from the east, were now compelled to divert vital men, tanks, and aircraft to the Western Front. This division of resources proved catastrophic for the Nazis. With pressure mounting from both directions, the German military machine began to collapse under its own weight. The opening of the Western Front was not merely a matter of geography, it was a decisive factor in the accelerated downfall of Hitler's regime. Historians widely agree that, without the Allied invasion, the war in Europe could have dragged on far longer, with even greater loss. Beyond its immediate military results, the impact of D-Day rippled through the doctrines and strategies of armies for generations to come. The operation demanded unprecedented levels of multinational coordination, with British, American, Canadian, and other Allied forces operating side by side. It was a masterclass in joint planning, naval bombardments, air support, and ground assaults all woven together in a single, audacious plan. The lessons gleaned from Normandy shaped the formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in the years after the war, embedding the principles of cooperation and combined arms operations into Western military thinking. The experience would serve as a touchstone for future generations of soldiers and strategists, a reminder that no challenge was insurmountable when nations stood together. The symbolic legacy of D-Day is no less enduring. Each year, people gather on the windswept shores of Normandy to remember the courage and sacrifice of those who landed there. For many, June 6th is more than a date on the calendar. It is a touchstone of freedom, a demonstration of what can be achieved when the free nations of the world unite against tyranny. The events of that day are commemorated in ceremonies, memorials, and the living memory of those who survived. It is, as many have called it, the beginning of the end of World War II. a phrase that captures not only the strategic breakthrough but the hope and determination that carried the Allies from the beaches of Normandy to the heart of Berlin. The effect of D-Day was quickly felt across Western Europe. By August 1944, northern France was liberated. The German retreat became a rout, with the Allies liberating Paris and pushing ever deeper into enemy territory. The momentum from Normandy carried Allied armies forward, and by May 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The nightmare of Nazi occupation came to an end, and Europe began the long process of recovery and rebuilding. The Normandy landings stand as the pivotal moment that made this possible, the catalyst for the liberation that followed. The lessons of D-Day, hard won and dearly paid for, continue to resonate. The logistical achievement of landing and supplying such a vast force across the Channel remains a marvel. The tactical challenges, overcoming prepared defenses, adapting to the unexpected, and improvising in the heat of battle, are studied by military professionals to this day. But perhaps the most profound legacy is the moral lesson, the willingness of countless individuals to risk everything for a cause greater than themselves. The courage of those who fought at Normandy is celebrated as a defining moment in modern history, a testament to the power of resolve and unity in the face of darkness. For the men who landed on those beaches and those who supported them from sea and sky, the aftermath of D-Day was not the end of their ordeal, but the beginning of the campaign to reclaim a continent. Many would not live to see the victory they made possible, but their actions shaped the world that followed. The Allied invasion of Normandy became a symbol of hope, of the triumph of cooperation over division, and of the enduring belief that freedom, though never guaranteed, is worth any cost to defend. As the decades pass, the events of June 1944 remain vivid in memory and meaning. The names of the places, Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, sword echo through history, reminders of a day when the course of the war and the fate of millions hung in the balance. The legacy of D-Day endures not only in textbooks and ceremonies, but in the values it affirmed: courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between allies. It is a story not just of military achievement, but of human spirit, a turning of the tide that reshaped a continent and, in many ways, the world.